Hello, this is Ralph from Happy Dog Training and welcome to another episode of Dog Talk. Today we're going to talk about the electric collar, also known as shock collar, especially by the people who hate it. It is probably the most controversial tool in dog training today, and I've never really done a full episode on it. I mention it here and there and kind of the things I do with that. I don't use it very often, but I thought it would be good to add a little bit more nuance to that conversation, and instead of doing another podcast with e-collar good, e-collar bad connotation, provide some more details and, as I said, nuance on when this is actually useful and when maybe not so much. So let's start off with how electric collars work. They're basically remote collars. They have two components. There is a receiver collar that sits on the dog's neck and it has two contact points, and there is a remote control that the dog trainer or the dog owner, the handler, is holding, and with a remote control there's multiple things possible. So depending on the model and what kind of brand you're using, what type of collar you're using, but there generally you have the option of emitting a tone or a vibration or a stimulation, or a stim as it's referred to. And the stimulation is what people usually take issue with, because that is created using electricity, but it's not an electroshock. So the way you could describe the sensation is more like a static shock. When you walk with wool socks over the carpet and you touch the door handle, or get out of your car and you touch the handle of your car, and you have cloth seats, not leather seats, you get a zap sometimes, and that's a static shock. We know how that feels. It's not pleasant, but it's not the end of the world. And on a electric collar, you can regulate the strength of that, and that's the stim that is usually in discussion. But that's generally how this works. Now, the impulse, the stim, runs between the two electrodes only. So you have these two electrodes on the collar that sit very close together, maybe like an inch or so apart, and they need to touch the dog's skin. They need to make enough contact so they can't touch the skin. And then when you press the button, the stimulation runs between those two electrodes. It also doesn't penetrate into the body. So it's not that you get electrocuted like I don't know, stick your finger in a power outlet, or you try to change a light switch without turning the switch off, the breaker off, and you get zapped. That's a lot more intense. So it's a very different kind of stimulation than you would get from actually power outlet. If you did something like that, we wouldn't do that to a dog. But that's how an electric collar generally works. So view it as a static stimulation that can be regulated in strength, runs between these two electrodes, and doesn't go in the body a whole lot. So it really stays in the skin layer. So it's really, really just superficial. And it definitely pinches. I mean, it's unpleasant. That's the whole point of it. But it doesn't penetrate in the organs or inside your arm or the neck or whatever, blood vessels. So it doesn't go in deep. The way the stimulation works depends on the color, on the manufacturer. There's obviously different brands out on the market. The biggest ones and the most common ones used by professional dog trainers are usually the Dogtra collar, the e-collar technologies, and the Garmin. There are a couple of other brands, but those are probably the most predominant ones used. Then on the cheaper end of things, or the less quality types of collars, there's a whole range of products. And when I say cheaper, it doesn't necessarily mean cheaper in terms of price, because even the really let's say unsophisticated collars that have very inconsistent stimulation levels, so they may break very easily, not last very long, not be very good. They may still cost you $100 or some dollars, but they're just not a very good product per se. On a professional collar, you would have a very consistent stimulation on a level. So if I set, let's say, on a professional model, the stimulation levels tend to go up higher, so you have more range. And usually from 0 to 100 or above that. I think in a Dogtra it's 127. That's the range, so from 0 to 127. On cheaper collars, or many cheaper collars I should say, not all, it's usually under 10. So that's kind of a separator, but I think there are some higher powered versions that only have 10 levels. But that's kind of a distinguishing factor in general. So like more professional versions have more granularity to them. You can adjust it in different levels, and the cheaper ones have lesser adjustment, simple adjustments, 1 to 10, something like that. And the way they go, or the way the wave is, or the stimulation wave is, depends again on the brand, because they all have patents on that. So let's say on a dog jaw collar, if I recall this right, it's a pretty linear progression in terms of how the strength goes up. On an e-collar technology, it's more like an exponential curve, but has a very low bottom bell. So it takes a while before it even gets to the same level as a more linear, like a dog jaw would, stimulation-wise. And they all have different pulse systems and different ways of doing it, because again, all these companies have patented their particular version to have a competitive advantage. They all view theirs as the best, obviously. But that's all what's on the market. Real quick on that, so the contact points, they do not burn the dog. That is something we sometimes hear from veterinarians who claim that e-collars cause collar burns. That is not possible if you understand how electronic collars work. And if you don't understand how electricity works, yeah, you can get the idea that it's possible with a electronic collar, but it does not have enough power to do anything like that. What the veterinarians who claim that is the case usually referring to, I'm assuming, because I actually don't know a personal case, I just know it from other people, is probably sore spots from those collars, because they can happen. They can happen if you leave the collar on too long, if the collar is too tight and too long, or even too tight in shorter times, or if the dog gets wet while wearing the collar, jumps in the lake, because they are all waterproof, so you can use all of these in wet environments. They were originally designed for hunting dogs. But if the dog gets wet and then you leave it on for too long, so the duration of when you get a sore will be much shorter if the dog is wet versus when the dog is dry. So after you're done with a training session in a wet environment, you just have to take the collar off to prevent that from happening. So when you see sore spots, they're not burn spots, they're usually just sores, pressure sores from somebody putting it on too tight or not taking it off in time. That's usually what those are. There is really no possibility of a collar causing a burn, and they're also not electrocuting dogs. But they hurt, and that's the main issue, right? They're unpleasant, which is the point. So that's how they generally function. In the way we should think about electric collars, they are aversive tools. They are an aversive tool like any other aversive tool. And that then bears the question, well, A, what's an aversive? And B, why use an aversive to begin with? That sounds unpleasant. Why should we do such a thing? So let me get to those two questions first before we dive more into applications of the collar. Now, what is an aversive? That is a highly debated topic, and dog trainers listening to this some will disagree with what I'm going to say now, because there is disagreement amongst dog trainers what's aversive, but I'm going to try to stick more biology than opinion on this. So what's generally considered aversive is something your body has a natural away response from. An away response is you withdrawing your body. And that would be, for example, you touch a hot oven plate and you move your hand away. That's an away response, because ouch, that was hot, I didn't know it was on, burnt myself, or barely burnt myself, maybe got it out in time. But that's an away response. A leaf is falling off a tree and you don't see it coming. It brushes against your arm, you're going to twitch away a little bit because what was that? Right? So it's that's an away response. So it's done by the autonomous nervous system, and it is not something you think about. It's just a normal biological response of, I want to withdraw from this stimulus. It's an unpleasant stimulus or an unknown stimulus that's surprising. And in that moment, that's just an aversive event. Now, our higher brain functions can overrule that. So that doesn't mean it's no longer aversive, it just means we're now understanding where it's coming from or what it is, so we're expecting it, so we don't have the initial biological away response, but it doesn't mean it's not an aversive stimulus. We just got used to it, or we understand it and don't react. So if I see, again, the leaves falling off the tree, and I see it coming, and I don't move my arm, and I want to see how does this feel like when it brushes against it. And it brushes against it, I don't move my arm because I'm watching the whole thing. It's still aversive, but I kind of watched it happen because I wanted to watch and experience it. So it wasn't something that was unexpected at this point. But it doesn't mean it's not aversive anymore. An example that dog trainers I discussed and debated this with is they brought up TENS unit as an example. TENS units are things that you may be familiar with from physical therapy or from just some people start enjoying TENS units. They're using to contract muscles. You stick them on your skin and you turn them on and then they have muscle contractions. This is therapeutic. It has definitely benefits. But it's per se an aversive event. And you can get used to it and some people start enjoying it, but that's your higher brain function overriding what is initially to your body an aversive event. So an aversive event has an away response. And an away response is a survival instinct, a survival mechanism. It's not even instinct, it's a mechanism. Every cell on this planet manages to do away responses well because the ones that didn't died along the way throughout the evolutionary chain. So if you're a cell, if you're a being of any kind, if you're an animal, if you're a mammal, if you're a human, what doesn't matter, if you're walking around and you have a lack of ability to avoid things that are bad for you, sooner or later something will end you, right? So that's basically what this comes down to. It's a biological survival instinct. So away responses help you to make it and stay in the game longer. So an away response is a completely natural, normal thing, and we should respond correctly to stimuli that are aversive because it's a survival mechanism of not enduring those or not exposing ourselves to those and so on. I hope that makes sense. So an away response is something that is something we want to get away from in some way. Now this, what I described, is a physical away response, but there could be emotional away responses, there could be aversives, there could be psychological aversives. Let's say you watch a sad animal rescue commercial, which they show up every Christmas season, and you see the sad animals and then they ask for a donation. So you feel bad about this and you want to get emotionally, don't feel bad, so you want to get away from that. You make a donation to feel better. Maybe you make the donation recurring so you never feel bad again. So, but these would be also away responses. They're just psychological away responses. So an away response is a pretty universal thing, and aversives cause away responses. So anything that causes an away response is an aversive, even if somebody may get conditioned and get used to it or no longer considers it aversive when he thinks about it or experiences it, doesn't mean it's no longer biologically aversive. So that's what an aversive is. So why would we use that in training? Why would we use any kind of aversive in training? And given what I just said, you understand it's not just electronic colors or electric colors that can cause aversive events. Any training color, any harness, any leash can create an aversive event of some sort. The very popular, or let's say popular with the force-free training community, head halters, and they come in different versions. There's so many different varieties and brands now and models of accomplishing that principle of pulling the head to the side with some kind of leash contraption around the dog's nose. But these are called head collars as a category. They are highly aversive to a dog, but they're considered very non-aversive and friendly by certain training groups, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because from a dog's perspective, this is a very aversive thing to experience. There really isn't a dog that will appreciate having a head halter put on them the very first time you try that. They may get used to it, they may tolerate it, like they tolerate muzzles and other things after they get conditioned to them, but it doesn't mean that's not an aversive thing. So a lot of things can be aversive, and it also depends on context, on how the experience of us of that aversive is. But if it's biologically aversive, really doesn't so much depend on the context. It really depends on, would my body have a biological away response from this or not? And if the answer is yes, it's aversive. Okay, so why would we use this in training? So in dog training, we use aversives very strategically for two types of things. There is, on the one hand, to stop behaviors we just can't have, behaviors that are, well, let's get to what those behaviors may be, but behaviors that absolutely have to stop. So if we need to penalize something that needs to end, we would use an aversive of some sort in this context. Or if we need to make a behavior happen in a reinforcement scenario with a negative reinforcement mechanism, we would also use an aversive. They're used very differently in both scenarios, but ultimately the goal is for the dog to learn to do or to not to do, depending on what we're ultimately after, depending on the training scenario. And aversives allow us to accomplish certain outcomes way faster, with less stress, with less detriment to the dog, and actually improving the dog's life and welfare than is possible with other mechanisms like differential reinforcement processes. Differential reinforcement is really touted as the alternative to aversives, but all the studies that are out there and the experience of professional trainers working globally have really shown what the limits of differential reinforcement are. And it's not that it doesn't have value, it's not that it doesn't work per se, it's not that it doesn't have a place in training, it does. But if you do it always without aversives, you often run into scenarios where you go for 6 months and you just run into a wall and you can't overcome it. And if the problem you're trying to fix can't wait that long, that's going to be a problem. It's also not that you can fix everything that way. So every study that's pretty much been done over the last 30, 40 years to prove, and I'm putting this in air quotes if you are only listening to this, that tools like electric collars aren't necessary and it could be accomplished differently, they always in their fine print do concede when it comes to predatory behaviors, livestock chasing, any kind of stalking or chasing behaviors, you often will need aversives. They've never been able to do it without aversives in those contexts. And those contexts are the squirrel running up the tree. Well, so you want to have your dog walk next to you and the dog sees a squirrel, he wants to chase the squirrel. Well, that's predatory behavior to go after. There's a chasing and a stalking aspect to it, probably more chasing in this case. But there isn't really a mechanism other than a negative reinforcement procedure that uses some form of aversive that creates a reliable outcome in such a scenario. If somebody can, put it on video, show all of us, because nobody ever has demonstrated that it's possible. People talk about it in theory and say study this, study that, but in reality, nobody has ever demonstrated that reliably. So if you can, put it on video, show the rest of us. And if it's something that would work for every dog, well, great, we'll all want to learn it then, right? But until that happens, we'll have to use aversives strategically at certain stages in training to convince dogs to stop doing things or to do things when they can't be accomplished in other ways. So that's like on a general level why aversives are used in training. They're out of necessity. They're not out of a desire, I like aversives and I want to use aversives. It would be the most wonderful thing on earth if we didn't need to use aversives to create reliability under certain circumstances. It would be beautiful if we could do it without aversives. But so far, the people who claim you can have never demonstrated that that actually will hold up under stress. And until somebody can demonstrate that consistently and reveal the big secret there on what it would be, because it, from a psychological perspective, really doesn't make sense. We will just have to keep using them, but we shouldn't overdo them. I'll get back to that later. But they have their time and place for specific goals. So let me give you a couple of examples that puts this a little bit more in perspective as to why you may even agree with that being necessary sometime, even if you generally disagree and came into this listening thinking, well, I want another argument as to why this is not appropriate. So let's say your dog likes to explore and chase animals and is curious about things that move, but you also like going hiking and take your dog out on a trail and would like to give him the freedom, where it's possible, to go without a leash and be a dog in nature and enrich his life tremendously through this process. Well, there are rattlesnakes out on the trails, especially here in Southern California where I live. And unless your dog has been trained to avoid rattlesnakes, this becomes quite dangerous, because your dog would go investigate a rattlesnake and get bitten in the process and possibly die on the trail, depending how far away you are from the next hospital. If you're on a remote trail, you're probably far away. So the way you would create something like this, you would create a wave response from a rattlesnake. A rattlesnake avoidance training is the term for this type of training, which is done with electric collars. Is the dog investigates the scent of the snake, and then he gets a stim, and then he backs off because he gets startled and it's unpleasant. So he goes, backs away and learns whatever was a bad idea to investigate that scent. And he learns that scent is not something I should be investigating. That is not a good scent. You may have to repeat that once or twice, and then maybe you have to refresh the memory a year or two later, once or twice. But generally, lessons like that stick quite well. And then, after that's being done, your dog is now safe on a trail, will not approach rattlesnakes, will not get bitten, and will not die. I don't think you can make the argument that that would not be a good application of an aversive, because it is very short. It is 10-15 minute training process. You repeat it a year or two later, one more time, 10-15 minutes, and you're done. And now your dog can go out on the trail and have freedom and be a dog and explore nature and have a far more enriched life and far more pleasant life than constantly being kept on leash. So the benefit to animal welfare in this context outweighs the short-term discomfort that comes from using this tool to create the safety around rattlesnakes in nature. It outweighs it by orders of magnitude that's not even comparable. So I'm giving my dog a lot more liberty and freedom by allowing him to do something like that. That is to me, 100% legitimate use of an aversive that will enrich my dog's life and make his life or her life so much better. Because there is just nothing like it, like having a dog out loose in the wild and letting him be a dog. This is such a beautiful thing. If you've never seen that, you should really work with your dog towards that. It's a beautiful goal. It's just a wonderful thing to see. So let me give you a couple of other examples. Let's say a dog mutilates its tail, which is not uncommon. It's not super common either, but a lot of people have experienced that. The dog chases the tail, grabs him, and starts chewing on it and mutilates it in the process. Some dogs also may chew on their paws and becomes habitual. It's usually by allergies or injuries that starts the process, but it could become an habitual thing. The dog just keeps injuring himself. An electric collar is a very quick and fast way to stop that without any further fallout, if it's done correctly. That's all. It has to be done correctly. That's one of the main things about these tools. If you do it correctly, there's no fallout of any kind. But you can't go through a 6 months differential reinforcement routine if the dog is mutilating and injuring his tail on a daily basis. That's not feasible. This is a tool that will stop that in most cases like this, very, very quickly. So it is, in this case, prevents injury. If you have dogs that are destructive, that eat the moldings of your doors and windows. I had a client once where the dog had done that to basically every window and door you can get to. Or eats the sprinkler heads, or digs up the flower bed, or chews through walls, or whatever destructive behaviors they may be engaging in. We may have to stop that quickly. Otherwise, that's not going to work. Now, obviously, these things have reasons, and you should address those reasons, and you have to go after them. So you can't just go, I'm going to penalize you for eating the sprinkler head. There is probably a lack of biological fulfillment and a lack of genetic fulfillment that absolutely must be addressed, because otherwise he's just going to choose something else. So you have to definitely go after the root cause. But if you need to stop something quickly in this context of destruction or injurious behavior, that is a way of doing that. That it can be combined with a training process that addresses the root cause. You're going to be on much better terrain than telling a dog owner, well, you just have to tolerate the damage for the next 2-3 months while we go through training. And just accept that all this damage in the meantime is worth it somehow, because most people don't think that way. This may be something that in certain dog trainer circles is a perfectly fine way to live, but most dog owners don't consider daily destruction or mutilation on their body an acceptable way to live. So you need sometimes to have faster solutions and then also address the underlying issue in parallel. But you can't wait and see if something works out over a couple of months. And then there's, of course, cases of aggression and dangerous behaviors where the dog is just going after other dogs or attacking people or things like that, where this may have to be part of the solution. I say may, it may not, it depends on the case, obviously. But these are the kinds of scenarios where, from a penalty perspective, this is a very appropriate tool in my view, because it saves the dog from injury, it gives a better quality of life, it creates safety, it prevents destruction. It has so many benefits that outweigh very short discomfort by orders of magnitude that it's worth doing. But that's stopping things. So let's go back to our hiking example. What I probably also need is a very reliable recall of my dog at a distance when there is some wildlife to be chased, or a deer, or a squirrel, or whatever, right? Blockhorn sheep, some of those ones. They're not as common to see, but you can see them sometimes, depending on where you hike. So if you need a reliable off-leash recall, there's only so much you can do with long lines. There's only so much you can do while the dog is physically under control. And that's always where it starts when you introduce an electric collar into a training concept. But ultimately, if you want to prove that out at a couple of 100 yards distance, or make sure it really works when there is a squirrel running up the tree and the dog is 300 yards away from you on a trail, you need a mechanism to convince him to not do that and listen to a recall command. And that would now be a negative reinforcement procedure you would go into. But that's again where an aversive is really the only reliable way that will accomplish that outcome. Again, as I mentioned, even the studies that want to prove that you don't need e-collars always concede that point on predatory behaviors. You do need these tools. That will not be written in their abstract or summary or recommendations, but it's always in the fine print when you read them. And I do read them, so I know what these conclusions usually include and don't. But that's one of those things. Right? I'm going to give you an example of how well this works at the end with one of the most impressive long-term studies done in New Zealand on this. But that is what these tools are for. So they're absolutely for this purpose of creating behaviors that we otherwise cannot create reliably and produce reliability in either doing or not doing that would be impossible to achieve otherwise. Now, I'd be the first to admit, and I'm not the first to admit, but I'd be the first to admit that electric collars are absolutely overused in dog training. They are used by some companies exclusively for absolutely everything. And they're constantly applied in even the most inappropriate ways. You can go to YouTube and see tons of bad examples of applications of that. So it's not that I'm blind to that, or I'm not accepting of the fact that the collar is overused, the tool is overused, and it's used inappropriately. There's entire training systems built on the use of the collar and not necessarily in the right way. So when you have this avalanche of usage, an avalanche of people who absolutely are in love with the electric collar because it is a very powerful tool, and it will definitely allow you to accomplish a lot of things more easily, even if you're not as good accomplishing them in other ways, that it's very tempting to just reach for this most powerful item. And I'm not a fan of that either. I think you need to understand how the principles work, how the principles of learning work when it comes to using aversives correctly. And you should use them only when you actually need them. And when you understand that you won't need them that often. But the thing is, you will sometimes need them. And there's some scenarios where it's really just, this is the only option to really make this work. And when, as I said, I don't use them very often, as I said initially. It's not very few dogs that come to training need to be worked or need anything with an electric collar. And when I see the need, I will discuss it with people, with the dog owners, and will tell them, here's the problem we have, and here's what we're struggling with, and this, I believe, is the fastest way and best way of doing it. I tried it in this route, I tried that route, but not quite working. I'm recommending we're doing this, but I'll leave it up to you. Nobody has ever said no under the circumstances, the way I describe it to them and explain it to them. But they've seen videos, they know exactly what I'm talking about at this point. It's not the first thing I do, it's not the first thing I reach for. I use it when I find it appropriate. I don't use it just because I have it, basically. But that's what I generally recommend. I recommend using that tool in a limited fashion. I recommend using that tool in a way that is appropriate and only when it's necessary and when it's really the best way. That's what I mean, when it's necessary. If it's the best way of doing something, then let's use the best tool for the job. So, a couple of other things or a couple of points on this. when you have training systems or companies that work exclusively with the e-collar, a very common approach is to condition and find a working level and work on low stim and whatever the terms are. It introduces the dog through this process to the idea that a human being is pressing a button and he feels the sensation. That is not a lesson the dog can ever unlearn. Once the dog knows that you are the one making this happen, he will never think it's not you making this happen. Because at that point your dog knows, well, you're the one who did this. So if you run into a scenario like, let's say tail chasing is actually a great tail chasing and tail mutilation. Chasing wouldn't be per se the issue, but tail mutilation, grabs the tail, chews on it, causes damage, would be a good example of that. If you have a situation where you do not want to be part of teaching the dog don't do that, where you want to teach the dog that's a bad idea based on just the activity you're engaging in is not a safe activity for you to engage in, you're going to see there's consequences when you do it, and you don't want the dog to think you have anything to do with it. You just want him to learn. Biting my tail is a bad idea. Chasing cars is a bad idea. Chasing motorcycles is a bad idea. Chasing squirrels is a bad idea. So whatever the thing may be, you don't want to be part of this process. You don't want your dog to think you have anything to do with this. If your dog is not familiar with the stimulation of an e-collar because he's never worn one before, you have that option. Because now stopping something like this becomes a very quick and easy thing to do if you set it up right and you remove yourself from the entire equation. However, if your dog knows that you are the ones pressing buttons and making him feel the sensation, that's out the window. And then creating a reliability when you're not present may be impossible. So the conditioning of an aversive in dog training is what this is really about. The conditioning of an aversive is generally ill-advised because it removes options for dog owners should they have a problem later that would make that the best solution. We're really taking an option off the table should we have a problem down the line that would really require it to be a novel stimulus that we no longer have once we start conditioning it. So if we're running a dog through an entire training process using an electric collar, we are depriving the dog owner whose dog has been through this process from that potential problem solving later. And we could make something, there's scenarios where it can be impossible to resolve a problem they may run into. And they may never have a problem. Most people never have these issues, but they do occur more often than you would think. I get a lot of these things, and a lot of dog trainers do. They get scenarios where this is the best answer, and the first question I always have, has your dog ever felt this? Has your dog ever worn one? Are you familiar with this? Because this would be the best and fastest option for you. And by conditioning it and getting the dog used to it and introducing him to ideas, was a person who does this, we are removing a vital option from a dog owner. So that's one of the biggest reasons that I'm not a fan of using them unless we need them. We need to maintain options down the line. Again, rattlesnake avoidance training works so much better if it's done with the dog not understanding where this comes from. And it's just one of those things. We should not do that because it ultimately impacts dog owners and their dogs. There are problems that are best fixed that way, and if we remove that option, we may leave them with no option at all, and they may have to struggle with whatever the problem is forever, potentially, as long as they have their dog. So that is one reason that we should use them only when they are appropriate for the problem at hand. And if you understand how learning science works around aversives and how they should be used in the best possible way, you don't need to have the dog wear that thing for like months and months on end or use it 100 times on a problem. This takes a couple of sessions. This takes a couple of applications. It's quick, and then you can put the collar back in the drawer. So these are not things that you need to do a whole lot and work with for a long time if you do it correctly. So the overuse of the electric collar is probably the biggest problem that the industry has today. And if the training tool ever gets banned, which I hope it doesn't. But if it ever gets banned, it's because of the overuse. And it will literally shut down 2 companies straight out of the gate if that happens, because there's 2 in particular who do that. And it will shut down certain training systems completely because they rely pretty much entirely on the collar. So, and yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen, because it removes options in cases where it really is the best approach. So now, those were like the key points I wanted to get into, but I want to close this out with one particular study, and I'm going to put this also in the show notes. And the study that's done in New Zealand with kiwi birds. And it kind of illustrates the power and what is actually possible quite well. And what's nice about this study is it is a study over, I think it was 6 years, so it's a long-term study. So we could see how the dogs were doing over a long period of time. And it's just gives us basically, or showcases everything we have learned about how to appropriately use aversive tools in training to accomplish outcomes without any fallout whatsoever. So in the kiwi bird study in New Zealand, it was 1,156 dogs, so a lot of dogs, were enrolled in the study. And kiwi birds are an endangered species. It's important to know. So in Australia, New Zealand, kiwi birds are an endangered species, and dogs like chasing them, just like our squirrels here in America. So here's what happened. The dogs that were in the study, they were wore an electric collar, and there was 1 training session per year for 6 years. So every year there was 1 training session. Let's just like think about that right there, right? So 1 training session every year, 6 years in a row. The first year, all dogs chased the kiwi birds because that was a prerequisite to actually get into the study. All these dogs were kiwi bird chasers. They were very interested in pursuing this animal. And then when they engaged in chasing the kiwi bird, they got a stimulation on the collar. That's it. 1 time. Done. Second year. All the dogs come back. All the dogs get to experience kiwi birds again. Out of the 1,156 dogs, I believe it was 851, it was over 800 for sure. I think it was 851, if I recall this right, did no longer chase kiwi birds because they were stimmed chasing a kiwi bird 1 time a year earlier. Let's just think about that. Right? So 1 time, once, in the chase of an animal, it stopped them. 850 of them. Now the others still did, but no. So every dog in the second year that still did it got another stimulation. Once. Year 3, another 236, I believe, over 200. Another additional 200 dogs now didn't do it. So now we're already over 1,000 in who have stopped chasing kiwi birds after 2 applications over 2 years. And then the last set, and that continued up to year 4. In year 4, I think it was, 40 or so were left. So in year 4, I think 40 dogs or 43 dogs or so, again, chased kiwi birds, and the rest had stopped, and they got another stim. Year 5, they all came back. Nobody chased kiwi birds. Year 6, they came back. Nobody chased kiwi birds. So within 4 years, or 4 applications over 4 years, all dogs stopped, while the majority stopped after 1 time. And none of these dogs had any other behavioral problems. None of these dogs hated their life. None of these dogs hated their owners. None of these dogs had ruined relationships. None of these dogs became aggressive. None of these dogs became fearful. They simply learned in the most natural way possible for a dog to learn this, that chasing kiwi birds is a really bad idea. There is a reason a dog will pick up a porcupine with its mouth only 1 time. Because it's a bad idea. And the dog learns by picking up the porcupine, man, that was a bad idea. Let me not do that again. And that's the exact same principle. It's the same principle we use with rattlesnake avoidance training. It's the same principle we use with other problems that I described. And many more I didn't describe. But that is the power of this tool. And this cannot be accomplished this quickly with anything else. It is really a very unique training tool that doesn't cause injuries, is very short in terms of its stress and in terms of its impact on the dog. It's a very short discomfort. And it's a very quick recovery after if it's done correctly. And there's no fallout either if it's done correctly. So it always comes down to doing it the right way, doing it correctly, not screwing up, and following the principles of learning to accomplish results like that very rapidly without causing any fallout on the dog side. And I'm arguing that that is in the interest of animal welfare far more than brief discomfort that puts an end to things we absolutely cannot allow. Dangerous behaviors, aggressive behaviors, injurious behaviors, things like that. So that's something I think everybody should keep in mind when we talk about electric collars in dog training. It shouldn't be about doing it for everything. It shouldn't be about wearing it all the time. It shouldn't be about the constant overuse by certain groups and companies and training systems. It should be about the targeted application when we have a problem for which this is the best solution. That's when they should be used. And that's the approach I generally would advocate to anybody to seek out when you have a problem. You should never approach it with, I want my dog to be trained with the electric collar. I would recommend you don't approach it with, I have this problem, we should do it with the electric collar. You should hire a professional who understands all these options and let them guide you. And if they suggest the electric collar, let them explain to you why and how exactly, and have them walk you through what's going to happen, how this is going to go down. And then if you don't want to do it, well, then don't do it and try to figure it out differently. But this is how I would recommend to any dog owner to approach it, because that will give you probably the best possible outcome in your training challenges that you may encounter. As I said, I don't use them very often, but in the training scenarios or with the dogs where I do feel it's the best option, I discuss it with my clients and I leave it up to them. I explain the options to them. I also will offer differential reinforcement approaches. I will offer them whatever I think could lead to the right outcome or know will lead to the right outcome. And I will let them decide which path they want to walk down on, because it's their dog, right? So it's not my choice to make, it's their choice to make. And I will present the options and outline the benefits and disadvantages of each of these options. And I'll let people choose. And I don't really have challenges that way, because I leave it up to dog owners. I don't impose myself on them in that regard. I give them the options and they get to pick. And I think that's the fairest approach, because you get to decide. It's your family member, it's your dog, and you want to be part of that question of that training process in that regard and make those types of decisions. I think that's the fairest way of doing it. Okay, so I hope this was a little bit more it was very informational for you. It was a more nuanced view on this very controversial training tool, and I would argue it's controversial because of its overuse mostly. But so it gets tempers pretty high. But I hope I was able to add some nuance and some food for thought for some of the things that I mentioned about the application of this into the conversation. And I hope you get something out of it. And I'll see you again next time. Bye.